Hello, Bravs. We're back with Mars Without Venus, a study of some homosexual generals by Major General Frank M. Richardson. Many people are offended by this book, and they're offended that I'm reading it, but I don't really give a flying fuck. I'm reading it mainly to anger most of these people that I've aforementioned. Back to chapter, I don't even know what chapter we're on, page 38. Although homosexual men may be inclined to join the forces, I should think that few would do so in the hopes of finding opportunities for physical relations with men. The relative freedom of civilian life, even before the recommendations of the Wolfenden Committee, let me adjust this, would seem to offer more scope than the open communal life and all-pervading orderliness and discipline of the army. The young band boys, by no means the little angels for which gushing ladies used to take them, were strictly segregated. Some men, to my knowledge, joined the army to put all that behind them. This was certainly the case with the transvestite described in my first chapter. I was not so sure about a passive homosexual soldier, whom I interviewed after he had been tried by court-martial. I referred to his case in my book about Napoleon as follows. One young soldier with whom I had to deal had, like Napoleon's Grand Benet in Egypt, been ill used by Arabs. But it transpired that he had not been unwilling. The trouble was that he had not been paid. He told me that when a schoolboy he had been homosexually assaulted by a soldier, but admitted that he had always felt more like a girl than a boy, and he had marked masochistic tendencies. He was a native of Sterling, and at the time of his boyhood rape, don't give away his location or anything, buddy, he and the soldier had been wearing the kilt. Does that mean they're gay, wearing the kilt? It is generally believed that such childhood assaults do not necessarily conduce to subsequent homosexuality, but in his case the kilt was associated with his masochism. He told me that he used to go to school in the kilt with nothing underneath and virtually invite corporal punishment. Let's see about there it is. Grand Benet. This was a young soldier who had been subjected to compulsory sodomy by Arabs. Napoleon treated them with little sympathy. Sympathy. Great dolt, Grand Benet. That's nothing to make a fuss about. Thank heaven you got off so lightly. Come now, stop crying and answer me. Napoleon wanted information about the enemy camp, but the soldier could only reply that from the position he was in, it was impossible to see anything. It is hard to say just how a good officer should deal with a man in such a predicament, but to laugh it off as no consequence denotes callousness, if nothing less. Yeah, and that's the man that so many of these fanboys love. He had been unsuccessful in joining a kilted regiment, but one was serving in Tripoli at the time, and he had lived in hope of reliving his schoolboy encounter. Steckel cites cases of masochists tempting their teachers to chastise them. As for officers, I have said that I did not like to probe their sexual inclinations, but I did hey my dudes about some. Hey my dudes, I see what I'm saying. I forgot he's fucking Scottish and not a hillbilly. Two exceptionally gifted, cultured officers came unstuck as a result of postings to Sandhurst, where they encountered gentlemen cadets who had joined the ranks at their public schools. Then there was a married captain with a detachment of troops at an Indian Hill station who sent a young band boy to me with a rash on his behind. But what has your bottom got to do with Captain? It transpired that he had the boy sent to his bungalow where he would give them a bath and a spanking if they had transgressed in any way. What boy of those days would not have preferred a tingling behind to an entry in his conduct sheet? I often thought that I ought to have done something about that officer, but his proclivities were known about and treated as a joke in his battalion, which was not the one to which I was attached. So they were not my children, as it were, rather as the curious propensities of some distinguished gentlemen in the artistic world of London seem to be today. Talking of London, it can be said without sacrificing... I gotta scratch my nose, pardon. Talking of London, Oh, my nose just won't stop itching. It can be said without sacrificing any of our pride in the magnificent brigade of guards that it is known that young guardsmen are sometimes available to wealthy homosexual patrons. Indeed, soldiers' tales have revealed that young soldiers have been introduced to this way of supplementing their pay without prejudice, just seeing their essentially a heterosexual stance, which may not, on reflection, be a well chosen noun. No one could believe that young men would join the guards with homosexual prostitution in mind. In the sexual life of our time, I. Block mentioned the soldiers' promenade in Berlin, where soldiers offered themselves to homosexual clients. Certain public houses near the barracks were also recognized as meeting places for that purpose. The London scene, with one surprising disclosure, may be read about in Montgomery Hyde's The Other Love. To turn from this sordid side of the subject, are there any positive advantages to be anticipated in a military career for a man of homosexual character? I touched on this question in my study of Napoleon. I have already indicated that a society composed entirely of exclusively heterosexual males, Kinsey Group 1, could then degenerate into a stag party in a more literal sense than the usual one. Perhaps from that, one could argue that the more we drift towards the right in the Kinsey scale, we might expect men to be more kindly disposed, more friendly to other men, until on reaching Group 6, we got those who are altogether too friendly, most undesirable recruits, and a few, at least, recognizably so. In talks and in writing, I have often pondered the question of why any of us love the Army. Many dedicated soldiers might find, if they examine their motivation honestly, that they do not love the Army at all, but only the regiment or some other corps. After all, the Army has always included that august body known to succeeding generations as the Horse Guards, the War Office, and now the Ministry of Defense. Army. What bathos. Anyhow, that distant, unapproachable entity too often seems to be out of touch with, even positively hostile to, what we consider to be best for us and our men. In the 70s, for a contrast between us and them, one needed to look no further than to the narrow-minded, blind politicians who, having decided in 1968 that the minor European state of Wilsonia was no longer worth defending, naturally turned to the defense budget and the services pay and allowances when extravagances in other directions called for some economy. When some conflict of interest arises between them and us, when the suspicion steals into the mind that the Army may not be the most generous and warm-hearted employer, what then keeps us going? Bruv, what does it? What keeps us going in our deep love for the British soldier, the jock to a Scotsman? In my case, and no doubt for others, this love is for an amalgam of soldiers who I have known in peace and war, and all the splendid men who fought under Marlborough and Wellington, whom I feel I know from reading about them and reading what they themselves wrote. Somehow, one overlooks the occasional bad hat. Indeed, some of the most badly behaved soldiers have lent a spice to life. It may be remembered with thrawn affection. Even Wellington, who could in a moment of exasperation call his men the scum of the earth enlisted for drink, often showed them amused tolerance, perhaps to an exclusively heterosexual officer such offenders, whose peccadillos are so often of a markedly heterosexual nature, may seem no more than lesser stags after the hinds, and therefore meet to be chased. Luckily for such criminals, and misdemeanors quickly escalate to crimes in the Army. Most officers are probably a little further to the right in the Kinsey scale, and will go to any lengths to protect their children from the impersonal attentions of the redcaps, the military police. I have placed Napoleon somewhere between groups 3 and 4 in Kinsey's classification, that is, somewhere about the middle, but inclining more to be to the homosexual end. Here, we may say, are the bisexual people. Though to Dr. Clifford Allen, an acknowledged authority, bisexuality is only a partial homosexuality. Could the careers of the men who are examined in this book have been positively helped by a homosexual component in their psychological makeup? Whether consciously or unconsciously directed, in most cases, certainly not. For Lawrence of Arabia, very probably, and for Napoleon, quite possibly. A German psychiatrist, Dr. Pretorius, analyzed the evidence suggesting that Napoleon was homosexual and concluded, on inadequate grounds, in my opinion, that he was not. One reason was that he could not convict the emperor of sodomy, which, with this, I wholly concur, but of course, the point is quite irrelevant. Dr. Pretorius ended by commending the study of the sexual proclivities of great men as a work of real importance because of the powerful influence of the sexual instinct on human nature, particularly when there is any suggestion of homosexuality with its special emotional pressures and the social difficulties to which it may lead. I agree with Dr. Pretorius in maintaining that such studies must not be dismissed as prurient essays in besmirching the reputations of respected men of the past. To a doctor, the diagnosis of such tendencies calls not for reproach, but for sympathy and the desire to help. Today's protagonist of gay liberation may scorn the idea of sympathy as quite misplaced, but it is important to realize that my studies end with the First World War. Up to that time, homosexual tendencies were unquestionably something to be kept secret, a handicap in any career, to any career. Whether we regard increasing tolerance of deviant individuals as a good thing or not, we can surely agree that an open-minded attitude and more widespread understanding of their problems must do more good than harm. Repressed homosexual tendencies by such a psychological mechanism as compensation and sublimation can lead some to excel in various fields. This can result in benefits to civilization, but it can also lead to disasters and bloodshed. With ruthless military dictators like Napoleon and Hitler, both of whom threatened to bury Europe beneath the ruins of their thrones. Napoleon could not have meant it. Hitler did, and he nearly succeeded. A new Hitler, equipped with the benefits of modern science, could bury much of the world. If we can understand the psychological mechanisms which can help to produce a Hitler or the evil sadistic killers studied by Dr. Clifford Allen, and still more important, if we could help the victims of such mental processes to understand themselves and to seek advice, harm can hardly be done, and good just possibly might result. If this sounds much too vague, woolly, and unattainable a goal, as it well may be, surely there is still some value in setting one's sights on a simpler target to bring help and hope of greater contentment to people troubled by some deviation. I suspect that more people whose place in the sexual spectrum is equivocal are made lonely and unhappy thereby than the few who are defiantly deviant, utterly content to be so and concerned only with stridently demanding their rights. The services could be a unique medium for the dissemination of information and sound opinions about sexual morality. It seems reasonable to suppose that recruitment for the armed forces on a completely voluntary basis, as it is today, must have eliminated some problems inherent in calling to the colors a complete cross-section of the nation's manpower. As in the days of war service and subsequent national service, there can no longer be many unwilling soldiers, and a great deal is done to ensure that those who join are in every way suitable for life in the services. It is less a question of your queen and country need you than are you good enough for the army. In my early days, men might join the army to get away from unhappy homes or to escape unemployment. Some even passed the barrack gates one jump ahead of the police. They were rigorously examined, but only physically. Today, a selection procedure known as Polheim's covers not only the physical fitness, but mental qualities and stability as well. A man who satisfies the personal selection officers, who can get the help of psychiatrists in doubtful cases, is likely to be well adjusted in every way. I do not know what is done about lectures on venereal disease in the services today. It will be plain from Appendix 1 that I dislike the standard lecture, which it was laid down must be given once a year to all units. The manner in which this unsavory subject was tackled by many medical officers seemed to be an amalgam of bawdy humor and blood-curdling tales of the horrors of venereal disease. Something of the sort was in fact suggested to me by an experienced officer, a specialist in those diseases, when I was detailed to give this talk in my first month of real Army service. After the introductory courses at the RAMC College and Depot, as a subaltern aged 23, I was shoved into the command cinema at York to give the compulsory lecture to an audience ranging from trumpeters and band boys to the commander-in-chief, Lieutenant General Sir Cameron Shute, a formidable figure known for reasons which will not escape those with Indian service as the Barn Chute. I rejected the advice of the experienced captain and waded into sex, masturbation, the lot, subjects then seldom voiced in public. I could feel the temperature falling to subarctic, except above my collar, where it was feverish. When I huskily announced that I was finished, that is just what I thought I must be. How could I send in my papers, for I had been issued with none except for my commission, signed during the illness of King George V by Mary R. and Edward P. What's the question mark for? Oh, okay. Into the dead silence burst the roar of a bull-voiced and popular subaltern, 1 year older than myself. Well, doctor, you've certainly taken a load off my mind. The laughter seems to raise the roof. I never looked back. At one period when I was an ADMS, Assistant Director of Medical Services in Tripoli, North Africa, I was invited to talk about sex at several Christian information courses run by the chaplains. Those who attended the courses had to write a sort of end-of-term essay about what they had learned. One young enthusiast, presumably with his tongue in cheek, submitted an essay of one sentence only. Christ is wonderful, but the ADMS was terrific. I took off my hat to the senior chaplain for showing me this and encouraging me to carry on with the talks. He clearly appreciated the seriousness and importance of my aims. I eventually came to see these in the terms set out in paragraphs 41 to 43 of Appendix 1. Maybe I will make a video of just the appendix so anybody interested in it can look at it, but I don't know. I need not repeat them here, and can only hope that they will not be thought to represent an unattainable goal. That's all for now, Bobs. I must go. Goodbye.